Hello, and welcome to Solidari-Tea, the Resource Center's podcast at UCSC. The purpose of Solidari-Tea is to uplift the voices and actions of students who work at the resource centers or with student organizations. I'm Mark. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an intern with the ERC who will be hosting today's episode. Yuya, who is in the background, is the other ERC intern who helps with video editing and, as of today, very much needed tech support. Please note that the opinions and views in today's episode are of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UCSC Resource Centers. Okay, and saying that, into my little monologue, with statewide primary and general elections coming up, many students might be curious on what ballot measures they should keep an eye on. So in today's episode, we were joined with community organizers from Anakbayan, Slugs for Coast Connect, and Equity Transit to discuss local measures that might impact student life. We will also discuss the history of the student vote, voter disenfranchisement, especially within marginalized groups, the importance of voting on behalf of peers who aren't able to, and resources for students to engage politically beyond voting. Okay, and so whichever guest who would like to start us off with introducing themselves, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Abby Elon. I'm with Anakbayan Santa Cruz, which is an overseas chapter of the Filipino youth and students fighting for national democracy in the Philippines, and I use they, she pronouns.
Awesome. I'm Lonnie Faulkner with Equity Transit, founder and director. I use she, her pronouns, and we are working to bring awareness around the importance of public transportation, both for equity and the environment. And we're excited to be working with Slugs for Coast Connect and many other groups to right now work on defeating Measure D, which is so important to bring equitable public rail transportation to our community.
I'm Michael Wool. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a College 9 affiliate, and I am president of Slugs for Coast Connect. We're an advocacy group on campus advocating for the use of both rail and trail countywide, as well as improving our greater public transportation system.
Cool. Thank you all so much for your intros. Could y'all discuss any historical significance of student outreach or with student voting? And I guess I can kind of blend it into like our next questions since they're kind of very much related. And also like if y'all could talk about the strength of the student vote as well as like certain examples that y'all have or that can think of around that. And whoever wants to start can go ahead.
Yeah, so the use of the student vote in Santa Cruz has played pivotal roles in elections before. So we have to kind of go back in time a little bit. UCSC opened up in the 60s. And when UCSC first opened, the age that you had to be to vote was, I think it was 21. It was higher. And in 1971, with the passage of the 26th Amendment, that was when 18-year-olds were allowed to vote. And we saw pretty immediately after, we actually saw organizers utilize the UCSC student vote to, sway an election. We saw that in the election of 1974 with the election of Gary Patton to the Board of Supervisors. And that was like the first time that students were able to steer the direction the community was going to go. We have to remember, before UCSC was here, Santa Cruz was a conservative, business-oriented town. So UCSC kind of brought progressiveness to Santa Cruz and leftism and all that. So the student vote very much shaped the Santa Cruz we know today. Whether or not people want to acknowledge that is another question, but students definitely changed Santa Cruz from what it would have been.
Yeah, most definitely. Any of our other guests have anything else they would like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. If you look about a decade after that in the Philippines, there was the People Power Revolution, which ousted the dictator Marcos, and it was started in the universities. And in that political movement, the people voted with their feet and they took to the streets. And that was in 1986. And so that generation is now like their children are students and are the youth, and actually the son of that dictator that was ousted is the one who was just elected as president in the recent Philippine elections. So we can look to that history to know how students can mobilize now.
It's interesting too to hear Michael Wool talk about the history of UC Santa Cruz when you look at all of the UCs together. And Berkeley was like a hotbed of student uprising and rebellion back in the 60s and 70s. And when they made UC Santa Cruz, they created it so there wasn't a central campus kind of structure, so that there wasn't as easily and readily a way for students to protest in large scale en masse as they had at the UC Berkeley and some of the other campuses.
And I think just to follow up with this too, we see a lot of UC solidarity between the campuses. Right now, the UC Student Association has, been lobbying pretty hard at the state level to get bills passed on behalf of the UC students. So like we're seeing the UC student voice start to affect, local elections in the towns that they're in, but also the statewide politics. So we saw that with the passage of SB 886 in the state Senate, which would, exempt student housing projects from further CEQA environmental review to help streamline more student housing to, face the housing crisis. And so it's just important to remember, like the UC system acts as almost like a fourth branch of government in the state of California. So we have a pretty big power in the state, like as students at the University of California.
Cool. Thank you all so much for contributing to that. I also wanted to kind of bring up a few of y'all's points that y'all said throughout that small talk. It was kind of interesting, I guess, talking about Abby's example. It's kind of interesting seeing now, especially with the past President Marcos's son being elected into office in the Philippines, and like looking and see, or you brought up the whole aspect of students looking back in time and kind of using that as an example to kind of push current student political movements, as well as, voting with our feet. And I also wanted to bring up, past examples within the podcast itself, how where I want to like also highlight a lot of the work that folks at COLA have been doing for the past few years as well. If y'all want to check out that episode, it'll be linked down below, where we did discuss, like, it all starts at that student level. The toughest aspect of it is, getting the ball moving. But once you get it moving, you tend to be surprised of just the amount of impact that can kind of come with it. So yeah, thank you all so much for talking, and I think we can move on to the next topic at hand. So I think looking within the US as well as in other countries, but from what we are kind of exposed to, it's very prevalent here, where marginalized groups tend to face a great disproportionate representation within many voting pools, especially with many not receiving or still trying to gain the right to vote. Could y'all talk about the importance for folks who align with certain groups to vote on behalf of their peers who aren't able to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the history here is kind of a really important thing to understand, because how we as a country actually systematized racism and classism through transportation. And that in and of itself, even today, even though it started in the 1940s and 50s, resonates even today. So, I like to say that at one time, the United States had the #1 public transportation system in the world, and that it was basically lobbying organizations, automobile, rubber tire, fossil fuel. A lot of people don't realize the trucking industry and asphalt industries, all these groups together had such a huge impact on controlling our government and shifting the course of public transportation in this country and destroying the majority of what was some of the best public transportation in the world by building highways in the bedrooms, in the backs of Black and brown communities. A lot of the communities were red line communities, so they were already facing struggle. But as soon as we took away this public transportation system, people that could afford to drive and buy a car were able to then still have access to opportunity. It basically created a huge wedge between those communities of poverty and people of Black and brown, um, you know, uh, heritage that typically were in these red line districts that no longer could get to work or no longer had access to voting and shopping and allowing themselves to have a better education by getting access to that. So transportation was a way of, after 100 years of civil rights activists, to get access to equitable, to be able to get on the bus and get on the trains equitably. Suddenly that was just cut out system-wide through a lack of public transportation.
Well, and I think to kind of build on that too, we're looking at a pretty influential election coming up in the next few weeks regarding public transportation. And, you look at, the population of South County and the Pajaro Valley and, further down into like, the Salinas Valley, which is, commonly referred to as the salad bowl of America. Like a lot of our food is grown there. It's systemically left out of a lot of programs that North County gets. So, if we're talking about, building a $30 million biking trail to benefit North County, how would that help the taxpayers in South County or the, residents in South County? There's also a lot of, migrant workers who don't have citizenship here who would also benefit from having public transportation, who can't vote on this issue. So it's important to remember, like, you're voting on behalf of people who will need this but can't vote. That also goes to, people under the age of 18. It's like, in America, people associate turning 16 with their actual freedom and being able to drive down the street to the grocery store or drive down the street to somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
This voting on, issues regarding public transportation benefits those who can't vote because they're not old enough. It benefits those who can't vote because they're not citizens. And we have to remember, like, we have the privilege to be able to be part of this decision-making process where not everyone does.
Yeah, I think those are some really good points. And the fact that I don't know if you're familiar with AB 1919 that's coming out right now, which is going to be such a huge advantage for our country because our state, because what it's going to give is free access to all public transportation for youth 25 and under. And what that will help establish is public transit users. But even before that started, that progress of AB 1919, more people under the age of 50 are seeking to live in cities and communities that have robust public transportation systems. And what we're finding here is that a lot of underrepresented communities, including the student voice here at UC Santa Cruz, underrepresented majority oftentimes are being left out by this wealthier group of people that aren't thinking about how the disabled community, the people of color, the elderly community would benefit so much more from having both the rail and the trail. And they, again, this very wealthy core group of people is trying to propagandize and use their money, in television and media, blocking the opposition out, so that they can stop the course of public rail transportation for our community.
Thank you so much. Abby, do you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when we're talking about marginalized groups, especially migrants and other non-citizens, it's really important to emphasize that while we can vote with those folks in mind, it's also really important to create ways that they can be included in democratic processes and express their democratic rights beyond voting. Because as you've both indicated, a lot of the times these elections, voting functions to, kind of pick between our oppressors or lobby for concessions from our oppressors. And it's really crucial that we emphasize that participating in the democratic process goes way beyond just voting and that it can include everybody. And that's why joining mass organizations and expressing your voice that way really has to be emphasized as something that can include everybody, regardless of their citizenship status or regardless of their identity. Mass organizations express the true democratic will of the people.
Yeah. And if I can add to what Abby's saying, is such an important point. Robert Bullard, who's the father of modern public transportation, he talks about this. And he says, when you look at any governmental organization that's making decisions on behalf of the people, and in our case, it's the Regional Transportation Commission or the Bus Metro Board, is that you have to have a representative from all of these underrepresented communities. So, for example, a representative from the UCSC student body needs to sit on the RTC and the Bus Metro. You have to have a representative from the Hispanic Watsonville community and the Black Santa Cruz community. All of these voices need to be represented. A person from the disabled community and the elderly community that really do represent the voices and the needs and the unique situations that occur amongst these various communities. So thanks, Abby, for mentioning that.
Yeah, of course. And I really appreciate you both emphasizing transit because when we talk about the mass movement, that's not just like something that's political and ideological, but it's actually literally physical. Like if the masses can't be literally mobilized and transported and moved, how can we build the mass movement?
Yeah, yeah. And a lack of transportation, a lack of robust public transportation is the number one barrier to both education and better jobs. So we have systematically cut out a whole sector of our population from better opportunity and access to voting.
Okay. So, as we highlighted in that previous question of examples from within, internationally and all over, could y'all talk about other examples or instances where there has been voter suppression, manipulation, or disenfranchisement, especially of like student voices and like previous elections? We did touch upon, the topic of transit being such a big issue that, or a big barrier to get a lot of folks, to the polls and everything. But, do you all have like any other examples to add as well?
Yeah. Well, voter suppression is an issue that is very common in, America. It has been since voting was, a thing here, basically. So we can, you can go through a lot of examples of voter suppression. But I think, we as Californians like to think that we're better than that. And that's just simply incorrect. There are many instances of voter suppression within California, within Santa Cruz, within UC towns, especially. So, like, you look at an example that comes to mind for me is how in Santa Barbara, they have all of the students basically living in a separate town. And it is incorporated. It's not part of Santa Barbara. They live in Isla Vista. So that basically means that they have no impact on Santa Barbara local politics at all. Even though a lot of them contribute to the Santa Barbara local economy, a lot of them are residents of the greater area. They have no impact on the city of Santa Barbara. And we see that with UCSC as well, with the fact that the location of UCSC is as far away from the city as they could have possibly made it. That was an intentional design choice. Originally, they wanted the campus closer to the city, but, people don't want students in their area. And that is seen as you think about what Santa Cruz is without UCSC, and what Santa Cruz is without UCSC is a majority white home-owning town. UCSC brings diversity, it brings, first-gen students, it brings new voices into Santa Cruz. And, we see already a physical segregation, but we're also now seeing, them not wanting us to vote in local elections because people don't see us as residents of Santa Cruz. So, you have an issue that's as important to UCSC students as Measure D being held during our finals week in a midterm election, not in November. Like that right there is a voter suppression tactic. The people know that we're going to be moving and that students are unsure of if they're still eligible to vote, if they've already moved off of campus, or if they're about to move off campus. We're busy taking our finals and doing all that. And they're holding an election that's basically one of the most important elections in the last 30 or so years. And, UCSC students, there's about 20,000 of us, and there's about 60,000 people in the city of Santa Cruz, 270,000 in the whole county. We absolutely have the power to shift an election. And having this important of an issue during a primary, during a midterm year, during our finals week is absolutely a tactic to get the UCSC vote not to happen.
Cool. Thank you so much, Michael. Did our other guests have anything to add? If not, I feel like that was a pretty good segue into our next question.
Well, I was just going to support Michael on the fact that, transportation and public transportation affects UC Santa Cruz students so much. And the fact that this was not done during an election time, that students could actually be as readily on board for that is, as he said, telling. I was just going to step back kind of to the national level, which is, you look at places like Georgia, where people are not even allowed to give water to, voters who are standing in these long, long lines because they don't have, they have voter suppression. They limit where voters can vote within communities. And so everyone's going to a limited number of polling areas. And so they're standing for hours and they're not allowed to give water or sustenance to the voters and that sort of thing. I mean, aside from the transportation factor where people can't get to the polls. So California has done a better job. Santa Cruz has done a better job. There are issues. We still need to look at those. But we really, really have a terrible problem across our entire nation.
I think if I can just jump in one more time too, another tactic of voter suppression honestly comes in the form of our housing crisis, because students are working, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, they're working their ass off at school, off campus, and, putting in hours a week just to afford to live here. So it's like, if I'm already putting in, 40 plus hours at school, and then I have to put 25 plus hours in at a part-time job just to afford rent, I don't have time to look into this election, And that's something that, me as someone who has been trying to outreach to voters, it's difficult to get people to care about something because it's just, we're already stretched so thin. So, kind of like tying in like the housing crisis into what this voter suppression looks like for students who are busy, who are poor, who are barely making it by,
I might add that's actually a national issue. I say that the way our work is structured, a lot of times now the way corporations and companies keep us so busy, we are working so hard, some people 2 and 3 jobs, that nobody really has the time to understand their political process or get involved in their political process. So we undermine the power of the people in this regard of keeping people overworked and tired and all of those things. It's not just students. I think it's everybody. And we need to change that.
It's true. I would love to broaden that even more to emphasize in the recent Philippine elections, a lot of the voter suppression that happened was of overseas voters. And that's a really important group because the Philippines' main export is its labor. There are literally hundreds of thousands of Philippine citizens living overseas in other countries, many of them here in America. And their vote doesn't just have an effect in the Philippines, it has an effect on our communities here in the US. And the Philippine consulate in San Francisco actually serves 9 states. It's the only Philippine consulate like on the West Coast, or actually I think there's one in Seattle, but it serves 9 states in this region. And again, if you bring up transit, if you're a Philippine migrant who is working all the way out in Idaho, there's no public transportation for you to come to San Francisco to register to vote. They make the process incredibly complicated. And even if you do everything right, we saw in this recent election thousands of ballots being returned to sender and not counted, and the overseas vote is generally more progressive. And so that was a really important base for the opposition party, and that's why there was such widespread suppression of this vote, and that has really serious consequences not just in the Philippines, but here there's a Philippine National Police outpost in the Philippine consulate in San Francisco. It surveils our communities. It terror tags our organizations. Anakbayan Santa Cruz has been like labeled as a terrorist organization by the Philippine National Police. Like this has real consequences for our communities here at home. It increases the amount of funding for surveillance and for militarism that impacts and like further represses our communities. So that kind of repression has really broad applications and really broad consequences for communities everywhere.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for like bringing up those examples, because I feel like one thing our listeners really need to, or that I hope they take away from this episode, is that a lot of voter suppression or manipulation, disenfranchisement, all of that isn't really seen as like a black and white of what we've previously experienced, where it's like preventing people physically. But then you have to think of all of the different levels that are preventing folks from actually getting their votes in and their voices heard, especially in a democratic government. You just they open your eyes a little, really take in the conversations that are being had around, especially internationally in other countries, because I feel like folks sometimes might be a bit too focused on what's happening at home that they don't realize, oh, something that's happening over there might actually have a great outcome or effect on what's happening domestically here as well. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank y'all so much. Moving on to the next question. We kind of touched upon it in the previous exam or the previous question, but there's always a need for students who are already registered because, Santa Cruz, it being a state school, a lot of folks are from within California, so they're registered back at home. But could y'all explain or talk about the importance of actually switching their ballots into Santa Cruz County or wherever, if you're from another UC, whichever UC county that UC resides in?
Yeah. So speaking on behalf of UCSC and Santa Cruz and, just the circus that is our political system here, it is very important to register to vote here. If you're a student and you're sick and tired of paying exuberant amounts for rent, if you're sick and tired of Metro being consistently overcrowded and late, if you're sick and tired of feeling like an outsider in a community you reside in for 4 years, you absolutely need to get involved in our local system here. The status quo is held up simply because UCSC does not or UCSC students do not get involved. If we're not swaying elections, local elected officials have absolutely no reason to care about any of our needs. And we're starting to see that change because, like for a long time, any apartment complex was the biggest controversy in the entire city. And you would see people come out in droves coming up with new excuses why this affordable housing complex is bad. But we're starting to see students kind of turn the tide on that, when 831 Water Street was going through city council, there was a, pretty normal local opposition of about like 10 people, but we saw over 100 students write to the city council in support of that. And that project passed because of the students getting involved in that. That's, about 100 affordable housing units. And we're seeing that with 130 Center Street. We're seeing that with a lot of different things where students are starting to get involved because we have to, the reality is in city of Santa Cruz, there's about 60,000 people and about 20,000 of them are students. So we're about a third of the entire population of Santa Cruz. We can absolutely be the dominant force in shifting local policy to reach our needs. Because right now, as a student, I can tell you I am very unsatisfied with our government in Santa Cruz. I can tell you right now that our government in Santa Cruz is primarily controlled by a homeowning class that does not consider the needs of students at all. Most of the people who run our public transportation system have never had to rely on it to get to work or to get to school. Whereas 50%, or actually I think it's 60% of our ridership or of Metro's ridership comes from UCSC students. So it's like, we should be the ones making these decisions that affect us. So I guess to people who are from areas where they feel like they can really own them in the midterms or, do all that, I totally understand that sentiment. And I know Santa Cruz is what we would consider a solidly blue place. But I think to categorize Santa Cruz as a place that is kind of like, a leftist liberal area, I think is categorically false. They just have different ways of masquerading a right versus a left, And I think students have to start acting like we are a third of the community. Like we make up a big chunk of this economy. Without UCSC, Santa Cruz's economy in the winter would be decimated because this is a tourist town that relies on summer tourism. UCSC supplements local businesses during the off season. Yeah. And then also, this isn't a Santa Cruz County thing. This is a UCSC thing, but I wanted to bring this up earlier, but I forgot. In the 70s, UCSC students also voted to tax themselves to have Metro service on campus free of charge, like at the point of writing. So we pay $110 a quarter to do that. Huge election. If students didn't vote for that, we would have to pay $2 every single time we get on the Metro bus. So throwing that out there, register to vote in Santa Cruz. You're a resident here. You belong here. And we got to act like, we can change this town because we totally can.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, Michael. Thank you so much. Use the power in a way that's really going to benefit you. And as UC Santa Cruz students, also that decision that they made in the 1970s, thinking forward of how it impacts future generations of students that come to UC Santa Cruz. I think that that's the kind of mentality that we should all come to voting with. But this particular Measure D, I urge, even if some of you say, well, I have this issue back at home and I really want to vote on that. I respect that. And this particular vote, this particular issue with Measure D is one of the most important issues that's come up in decades in this community and will make a difference for students for decades to come, as well as people with disabilities for decades to come, and elderly and people of Watsonville. And there's so much equity pieces, parts here. So I would urge every student to please, even if they have to do a last minute register to vote, day of vote, come and vote for no for Measure D. It's going to be critical and we need everyone to step up for this one. And then just being aware in the future, like when are particular votes and issues going to affect the student body and future student body. So really appreciate that, Michael.
Yeah, I'd love to add just like a personal connection to what both of y'all said. I've been registered to vote in Santa Cruz County for the past 2 years, and I actually recently turned 21 and I had to renew my driver's license. And as you brought up, Michael, the instability of the housing market here is a form of voter suppression because it means that most students who live in Santa Cruz don't have permanent addresses here because you have to move around so much. And so, yeah, my permanent address is my parents' address, which is in Contra Costa County. And when I made that my address on my driver's license again, it automatically registered me to vote in Contra Costa County instead of Santa Cruz County. And I didn't even know that. I wasn't informed of that. And that was after the deadline to register to vote in Santa Cruz County. But luckily, I'm able to register to vote online and bring that receipt to my voting place for same-day voter registration. So I just wanted to bring that up because I'm sure that other students are in that same boat. If you've turned 21 recently, if you renewed your driver's license, check to make sure that you're still registered to vote in Santa Cruz County. And if you're not, it's really quick and easy to register online, and you can bring your receipt and register same day to vote. No on Measure D.
Thank you, Abby.
And just throwing this out there too, we're going to have some handy, fun, fresh links that are going to give you the link to register to vote on the Secretary of State website. It's going to give you a list of voter locations. And on that list of voter locations, the dates are from 2020, but the locations are the same. So if you live on campus, the Stevenson Event Center is going to be where you can go register to vote same day for voting in the primary election. There's also going to be in-person voting at the Kaiser Permanente Arena downtown over by the river. And also for people on the other side of the river, there is going to be always a voter location at the county building in the clerk's office. You can go and register to vote there and go vote whatever you need to vote. Measure D is important. There are a lot of issues also going on as well. So make sure to look through the voter guides online and register to vote. It's not too late. Your vote will be counted.
Yep. Thank you all so much. And yes, thank you, Michael. All the links for all of the resources will be linked down below. I just wanted to kind of really wrap up everything that y'all said in that previous question of just the importance of having students vote within Santa Cruz. And, with the example that you brought up, Michael, talking about how it's definitely some of the students now might not think, oh, I'm graduating in X amount of years, whatever I'm gonna, why should I? It's not gonna really apply to anything for me now. Lonnie and also Abby, y'all all kind of touched upon this as well. Folks kind of have to think about the generational impact for students to come, because us now, students now, we are reaping the benefits of a lot of what the students did in the 70s with gaining metro access for students, because obviously I don't want to drive up to campus. Parking's expensive. If I have to pay $2 for taking a bus every single time, that's a big no. Because just kind of off topic, yesterday I showed up to my section, turns out it was canceled last minute. I would have not been happy if I had to shell out $4 by going up and back all within 30 minutes. But kind of just also touching upon Measure D and how that kind of wraps into all of this, and how Measure D itself could impact student life soon and also for future generations to come, is just the whole aspect of, a lot of students, due to the housing crisis here at Santa Cruz, they aren't able to have reliable transit to and from campus. And a lot of folks obviously are living, a good amount of them are living on the other side of the river, down the east side, or even further down to Watsonville, and them having to deal with traffic. If you could also cut that down, make your commute a lot easier, as well as, carbon emissions, cut those down, then that is a plus all around, and also helps us address a larger issue, or the two big issues at hand here in Santa Cruz. Did y'all have anything to add? If not, I was going to segue into the next question.
I'll just add a little bit to just the student experience of why I got involved in Measure D, or in not Measure D, but Rail and Trail. So I used to work when I was a first year. I worked in Capitola on 41st Avenue, and I, am from Santa Cruz County, so I wanted to keep the job that I had. I was a barista at a specialty coffee shop, and I had a really good community. I was making money, and part of why my parents said I could live at the dorms and not commute from where I grew up over in the mountains was because I would be working and making money and, starting to gain financial independence. And I really wanted to transfer to a location on the west side, but that wasn't happening for a little bit when I first got here. So I had to bring a car to campus my first year to get to work, because to take the bus to work over at 41st Avenue, which is a little under 10 miles away, would be about an hour and a half and 2 transfers from campus, which is insane. It's not that far. There is no bus that directly links UCSC to the east side. Every single bus from campus goes straight to Metro Center, going a various route. I always looked at this abandoned rail line and thought, that'd be really nice if I could just bike down to Bay in California, jump on a train and make it to work, and make it to, all the businesses down at 41st. Most students don't have cars their first or second year. So to expect students to get to the east side, to go to Target or to go to, any of the shops over there is just completely unrealistic. So, that would be a huge help. Measure D, big deal. We've talked about it a lot. If Measure D passes, rail transit in Santa Cruz is dead. There will not be rail transit. It would also put the trail construction behind probably another 10 years, because as many of you know, things in California take a long time. Part of the reason that things in California take a long time is due to this thing called CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, and its various regulations for receiving either mitigated negative declarations or environmental impact reports. Environmental impact reports are huge documents that are hundreds, if not thousands, of pages long. To write an EIR all over again for something like the rail trail, which we already have mitigated negative declarations for most of the segments, would add a lot of time, research, and effort into something that we can already build within the next 5 years. So in the short term, if you want to get around Santa Cruz on your bike or your e-bike or your skateboard or taking the 210, 2 feet, 10 toes, walking down the street, vote no on D, because that will get the trail built as fast as possible. In the long term, if you want students to not have to bring a car to campus and spend $700 on a parking permit if they live in the east side, the rail corridor theoretically could be up and running in the next 10 years. Me and a few other people from other transit advocacy groups actually mapped out what that would look like in the interim and what that would look like in the long term. So like currently, right now, the plan would be for single tracking, which would, make headways a little bit harder to meet, but also, with the possibility of adding supplemental bus service when we, going the other way during commuting times and all that would actually really help get this system up and running. Like, this is totally realistic, whether people want to realize that or not, because it's so drastically different than what Santa Cruz is used to, which is just widen the freeway, add more lanes.
More parking.
Yeah, more parking. Oh, I could go on, but again, Measure D is really important. Most important election in 30 years. Please vote no.
To kind of give it this overarching view of where we need to go as a country and a world, is that we need to lower car usage, and we're only going to do that if we build robust public transportation systems, buses and trains. The thing that Measure D Greenway people don't tell you is that funding for the train actually boosts bus metro, because bus metro needs to access the rail to get people then from the train to Cabrillo College and to the hospital and to UC Santa Cruz. So there's a whole infusion of money that comes when we seek the funds for the rail that will benefit everybody. And I talk about my friend Veronica, who's blind, and people who can't drive or who don't have a car. It takes 2.5 hours for her to go one way from the west side to Capitola for her medical appointments. The same thing for a student like yourself, Michael, who lived in Capitola and had to come to school. When we ran the little trolley, Coast Futura, it took less time for us to go from the boardwalk to the overlook in Capitola than by car. And that was going 10 miles an hour. We could only go 10 miles an hour because of the status of the tracks. So imagine being able to go, at speed, 20, 25 miles during certain segments. That picks up a lot faster. So you can go all the way from West Side Santa Cruz to Watsonville in 40 minutes. And students can then live in places like Watsonville very easily and pick and have more choices of affordable housing along the line and then get to school. Yeah. So
I would love to add just one more thing really quick, I swear.
No, go for it, Abby.
Mark, you brought up traffic, you brought up carbon reduction, and we've talked a lot about like the distances that students have to travel. And I would just love to add that most of the workers who work at UC, especially the AFSCME workers who keep our campus clean and safe during the pandemic, the vast majority of them cannot afford to live in Santa Cruz. And a lot of that rush hour traffic that we see on the one between Watsonville and Santa Cruz is those workers who make the UC run. And so that rail would not just serve students, but it would also serve the workers who the UC does not pay enough to live in the city they work.
Yeah, and our rail system connects us into the greater statewide network. And that statewide network would allow us to take rail to Monterey, San Jose, San Francisco, all these amazing key places that families might live. And for example, we have some nurses that work here in Santa Cruz County, but they live in Salinas because they can't afford to live here, but they serve the people here. They were so angry when they learned about Measure D and Greenway's efforts, because they're basically cutting out a very affordable, dependable, quick way to get to work for them, instead of they have to, waste an extra hour or 2 hours plus a day sitting in traffic, time they can't spend with their families, time they can't spend, enjoying other activities outside of sitting in traffic.
Also, just throwing this out there, connecting to the greater statewide network, there's this fun, cool project, the high-speed rail network, that we would be connected to if the branch line stays available, through connections through Pajaro Station, eventually to Caltrain and up to Gilroy, where you could catch high-speed rail. From Gilroy, that would connect through the Central Valley to LA, take about 2 hours. So that's kind of cool. We wouldn't want to be cut off from that.
I was about to say, imagine going to LA for a fun weekend.
Right? Or even
that
like
would
a
be
day.
fun. Yeah. Okay, cool. I guess all of this was a good segue into our next question. When discussing with fellow banana slugs, it seems that two major measures, hint, I wonder what those could be, are going to be the most impactful for current and future student life in Santa Cruz. What are those measures? We kind of talked about one of them. What are those measures that you think our listeners should keep their eye on? And if y'all could also like kind of differentiate like the yes and the no for each of them, and like kind of what they represent as well.
Yeah, well, we already talked about Measure D. No on D means yes to rail and trail. So it's that simple. It's been a little difficult to run a campaign where it's the no, but it is for a yes thing. So no on D is the important thing. Another important measure is actually Measure E. This one is a little bit less black and white as Measure D. Basically, the city of Santa Cruz is about to get sued by a voter rights group that wants us to do district elections or ranked choice elections for our city council. So right now, if you're a voter in the city of Santa Cruz and you voted in a city council election before, you vote for up to 4 candidates, and the top 4 win city council seats. The way that works is basically you're on the city council and they rotate who is mayor. So there's no direct election of the mayor. It's always been like kind of like one city council member is mayor for a year. So that's why we saw, Mayor Justin Cummings. We've seen Mayor Johnny Myers. Like there's been various city council members who have been mayor. It doesn't happen. Like we never vote on it. So a lot of people are like, oh, what does the mayor do? The mayor doesn't really do that much aside from being the executive at a city council meeting. So it's like kind of like a rotating thing. And, that system makes sense for a town like us because we're a small town, basically we have to shift towards district elections. Like this is a non-starter. A lot of people were trying to debate like, well, what should we do? It's like, we're going to get sued if we don't do this. So we have to do this. The city council came out with a few different draft maps. Basically, one of them was 6 districts and an at-large mayor that would be elected every 4 years. So that's a big shift from our current system of having no at-large mayor. Or we could have 7 districts and continue the rotating mayor between the 7 districts in Santa Cruz. So Measure E, if you vote yes on that, votes for 6 districts and an at-large mayor. If you vote no, it's 7 districts and no at-large mayor. So for UCSC, this is impactful because if you look at the 2 maps, the 6 district map has UCSC in 2 districts. The campus itself is split into 2 districts. On a no side, if we have 7 districts, UCSC is its own entire district. And from a personal level, neither of these maps look very good. I'm just going to throw that one out there because while it is great to see a UCSC district, which would basically confirm either a student or faculty member would be on city council at all times, there's 20,000 of us. And 1 out of 7 does not represent 20,000 over 60,000. So I can kind of see why it would make sense to have UCSC as 2 districts. However, the way that they split those 2 districts up made it so that we would be sharing a district with 2 very, very wealthy neighborhoods in Santa Cruz. And, it's a coinky dink, not really, that the most high income neighborhoods are right by campus. But it is just the truth that there's a reason that most UCSC students, when they move off campus, move downtown. It's more affordable. It's, a lower income area compared to the Upper West Side, Lower West Side, West Cliff, the circles, and all that. So I think it's harder to be as passionate about Measure E because things like this, it's just like, it's so much information to learn and there's so much reading in between the lines that needs to happen. I'm a solid no on E. And I'm a no on E because I don't think we need an at-large mayor every 4 years. I think that having it split would mean that every district gets its representation at some point. And also, I think that I just think that putting UCSC into really upper class neighborhoods would most likely outnumber us in both of those elections rather than give us the representation that we need. Do I think that district elections are what Santa Cruz needs? Probably not. Is that up for debate? No. We have to do this. So it's kind of, this one's picking between who can put more lipstick on their pig, but I think 7 districts makes more sense for Santa Cruz and will give students a guaranteed district. And also the districts outside of UCSC are also a little less, gerrymandered is the term that I was thinking of, but also at the same time, it's not as like aggressive as like a gerrymander in like the South. It's kind of just like Santa Cruz is such a small town. So the neighborhoods themselves can get combined a lot easier. But yeah, I'm a solid no on E.
Yeah, I think gerrymandering is a good way of putting it, diluting the student vote, diluting the student force. And, all the progressives I know are no on E. And it's interesting. I was riding my bike along West Cliff and all the very wealthy big houses have the yes on E signs. And I'm like, okay, I know that developers are backing yes on E. And then, of course, that at-large mayor, where the mayor has, you have one district that then has more power than all of the other districts for a given amount of time, rather than it moving the power around through each district. And both of those things, I think, are really critical, having the student voice and have power, and having the movement of the mayor around from district to district rather than isolated in one district.
And I think, just to add to this, whoever gets that student seat on city council, do not let us just have one seat on city council, because we make up a lot more than 1 out of 7. So no on E, but whoever gets this better be coming at city council telling them, like, this is disenfranchisement. We are a lot more than 1 out of 7, because we are. And we're scattered throughout the whole city. So it's hard to get that concentration to mobilize around one candidate, especially when they split us up so on such arbitrary lines. But whoever gets that seat, please do not let this be the end of our district election battle, because this is a weird choice. I don't know. This one has been, obviously, there's not as much of a black and white as it is with no on D.
Okay, cool. Okay, so moving on to our next question. How can students participate more or engage more with the elections coming up? And this also, like, especially applies for folks who might not be able to vote, and just, participating at a greater level other than voting in general. Any resources or events that y'all know of coming up?
Yeah, not to plug Lonnie's group, but Equity Transit is a great group to join if you want to represent people struggling with access to public transportation and outside of voting. Voting's an important tool, but it's not the only tool in our toolbox to make systematic change. There are so many powerful minds in this community who all want the same thing. And it seems, when you don't connect with these people, it seems like nothing will ever change. But I really do see a movement in Santa Cruz towards, environmental urbanism coming. I think we're seeing this in, having to address a lot of these problems that have been kind of building up for a long time. So I empower everyone to start to do some research into, housing advocacy, into transportation advocacy, into houselessness advocacy, because a lot of, Santa Cruz obviously is dealing with a lot of houselessness, but the reality is it is a lot less clear than people realize. Like, it's like being houseless isn't as black and white as a lot of things. I know we've said that phrase a lot, but a lot of people don't consider themselves houseless if they don't have a permanent address. But the reality is they're not in a stable housing situation. So helping people get into stable housing is another way to get involved in our community. And then also reach out to your local officials. They respond. This is a small town. You can absolutely get them to respond to you. And they don't, it's hard to ignore a lot of students emailing you. So city council heard all of the students who emailed them about 130 Center and about 831 Water and all these other housing projects. So I think right there is, like, you want to get involved past voting, just send an email to one of your city council members, send an email to a board of soups. They will respond. Like, I will say, you can get a hold of them if you try.
Thanks for the plug, Michael. I'll plug you back. Get involved with Michael's group, Slugs for Coast Connect, because they work really hard along with the housing. Is it Housing Zenon's Housing Student Housing Coalition to really work on these issues on campus, and then connect out to the more broader community, so that we can all work together to amplify each other's message and magnify our impact. And for the vote coming up, which is really just a little over a week away now, we need as much boots on the ground, getting out there, getting out the word about no on Measure D. Big, important. Please come to the election, help get the word out. No on Measure E. But then beyond that, our organization, We'll be having National Transit Equity Day again this coming year. We're going to try and do it in Watsonville this year. And I've got some ideas like how can we actually get people through public transit all together down to Watsonville so that we're supporting Watsonville and having this amazing event there. And, you know, just working together. We're a village, and we're only going to be successful in these movements is if we seek out each other and work together. And really appreciate Michael and Mark. And I haven't worked with you, Abby, yet, but hopefully we'll get a chance to reaching out and making that possible.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd love to emphasize that, like, due to all the corporate and like owner interests that you've indicated in this election, it's definitely possible that these things will not turn out our way due to the way that the system is structured that allows the wealthy to buy political power. But if we do end up having a negative result in this election, we can turn that into a positive opportunity to agitate folks around the fact that this is not representing the true interests of the people, and to build true organic grassroots political power around that agitation, and to organize people. I'll do my plug. I'm in Anakbayan, Santa Cruz, and we're a member of the Students Organizing for Liberation, or SOUL coalition, and that includes us, Anakbayan, the Filipino youth and students. There's also Gabriela, the Filipino women and LGBT sector. And then there's also the Worker Student Solidarity Coalition, which is a local chapter of United Students Against Sweatshops. There's the Black Student Union, there's Students for Justice in Palestine, and there's the Cool Jews Coalition. We make up the SOUL Coalition, so regardless of your identity, regardless of what you're interested in, there's a place for you in SOUL, especially if you're interested in getting involved with like anti-imperialist organization or stuff along that line. Like, I would urge you to check out a SOUL organization.
Yep. And kind of building off of what you said, Abby, because I was initially introduced to Anakbayan from the Cola podcast, where a few folks were pointing out other student orgs around campus that are doing great work and that, you know, students should look into. So I think my little recommendation for folks on campus that would like to be more involved politically outside of voting itself is to join any of those student orgs that you listed. They are all hyper, you know, I'm about to throw out a Santa Cruz word, intersectional. They work with each other. They all, you know, organize together. And if you join one that you believe aligns the most with your personal identity, chances are eventually you will meet other folks that kind of like align with you, and then that's how student movements are built. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I actually found Anakbayan through Cola as well. And I'm actually also in the Cool Jews Coalition because I'm Jewish. So yeah, very intersectional. There's definitely a place for everyone, and a way for us to all work together. That's how we build the broadest mass movement, is through the coalition of many different sectors of society.
Absolutely. Okay. Anything else to add? I mean, I guess the next question kind of touches upon it, but is there anything that y'all wanted to highlight about your student orgs, or just anything that we weren't able to touch upon in this episode?
Register to vote in Santa Cruz. We have the links in the multiverse, wherever this is going to get posted. We have links to locations to vote in Santa Cruz. So if you live on campus, the Stevenson Event Center at Stevenson College is where to vote in person. If you live downtown, the Kaiser Permanente Arena where the Santa Cruz Warriors play is where you can vote downtown. If you live over the river, you can vote at the clerk election. There's a lot of voter locations in the east side, into Abtos and into Watsonville. If you need help finding a place to register to vote, reach out to people, reach out to local officials, reach out to your friends, and make sure, you know, friends don't let friends vote yes on D. So make sure you're doing that. If you want more updates, follow at Slugs for Coast Connect on Instagram, at No Way Greenway on Instagram. at Equity Transit on Instagram. Yeah, that's the
All
plug.
will be linked down below, by the way. So
Awesome. Yeah. And check out after the election, when you have time after your finals, check out equitytransit.org, the Transit Equity Day page, and you'll hear 10 speeches. Michael was one of the speakers. Zenon with the Housing Coalition was one of the speakers. So you had 2 representatives from UC Santa Cruz at the National Transit Equity Day. It's a national coalition movement. We want to get it bigger and make it bigger and bigger. And I wore this short today. Rise up.
I'd love to bring up another really important piece of legislation, and that's on the national level, and that's the Philippine Human Rights Act, which would cut U.S. military aid to the Philippines. The U.S. has sent billions of taxpayer dollars over to the Philippines, and it's actively funding human rights abuses by the current Duterte administration. And now that we see that Marcos, the son of the dictator who declared martial law and took power for 20 years, and that marked a horrible period in Philippine history for human rights. His son is coming back into power. It's more important than ever to cut U.S. military aid and make our voices heard that we will not support the human rights abuses of the Philippine military. And the Student Union Assembly at UCSC has passed a resolution in support of the Philippine Human Rights Act. So this is something that students are already behind, and we've lobbied, Anakbayan and Gabriela Santa Cruz have lobbied with Jimmy Panetta, our local congressman in this district, to endorse the Philippine Human Rights Act, but he's actually refused to, and we keep trying to set up these meetings with him to talk about it, and he schedules them, and then 15 minutes before he just cancels them. So yeah, we're kind of getting ghosted by him. He's up for re-election this year, so there's going to be on June 14th a National Day of Action around the Philippine Human Rights Act. So follow us on Instagram at Anakbayan SC and look out for an action that we might be doing directed towards Jimmy Panetta, possibly at his office in Santa Cruz, demanding that he reflect the voice of his constituents and support the Philippine Human Rights Act.
Yeah, fun fact, actually really, really sad fact, Jimmy Panetta also will not speak on Rail and Trail.
Yeah.
I think that's like the overarching thing that students, if you want any movement or just anything in general from your government leaders, email them. Because from previous experience with some of our local elected officials, a lot of the meetings that they have with students through SUA or any other student org, it's usually just a check in their box to be like, okay, I did that during election season. But unless you actually, put a little fire under them, heat them up, actually get them thinking about all of these initiatives, nothing will really happen. So
I wanted to give a plug for Robert Rivas, who just came out opposing Measure D. He's an assemblyman who has done great things environmentally and for transit. He's the one backing AB 1919 for free youth transit. And I've heard that he's actually going to be like the head, and I apologize, like the key assemblyman for the country, which is fantastic. He's an amazing man, and he just came out opposing Measure D, as well as Mark Stone and
Jerry Brown.
Former Governor Jerry Brown, and a number of really key people. And I think even though Panetta was really disappointed, there was some rumor that he had gotten funding from Greenway. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's some word around that to stay quiet. But to me, choosing leaders that really take a stance for the right things, for the right reasons, that support the voice of the people and the needs of the people is really critical.
All right. Anything else to add before I wrap up our episode today, guys? No? Okay. If there's
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely. If there's any, resources or anything that comes out after we record or anything, they will all be linked down below. We want to make sure that our student body are as well informed as possible, and just knowing where all of the resources are for them. Okay, so going into my closing, as we come to an end to our conversation, I wanted to extend another thank you to Abby, Lonnie, and Michael for joining us today. I also want to extend another thank you to Yu Yao, really putting in the work today. Thank you, Yu Yao. Abby from the Women's Center, Kaz from APERC, and Cameron and Teresa for all of their help behind the scenes of today's episode. We really hope that our conversation today provided y'all with some more insight, or just, really helping this be within your consciousness for the upcoming week and a half leading up to elections. And also, like, with the resources, hopefully those will help y'all as well, especially with contributing at a greater level within our local and maybe state, international, national level of politics. And as I've been mentioning throughout the episode, all of the info and resources that we discussed today will be linked in the description down below. If you enjoyed listening to the conversation that we had today and would like to hear more, please feel free to subscribe to our channel. Oh, and another thing, before I let y'all go, if you're still listening, there is a giveaway part of today's episode, or part of this episode. Just make sure to check out our Instagram at ucsc.erc for all of the guidelines and rules and details and all of that. Thank y'all so much, and have a good one. Have a fun and safe summer break, or finals week, depending when you watch this. It might not even be in the summer, but whatever. But anyways, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.